Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Validated, the science of sterile processing efficiency. I'm Brett Norton from Beyond Clean, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our event sponsor, One Tray IST, for supporting today's educational event. Their dedication to your education is what helped make today's event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, my Beyond Clean colleague, Mr. Hank Balch. Hank is the founder and president of Beyond Clean, and as pretty much all of you know, he's a well-known industry writer, blogger, and social media connoisseur. He has written over 150 sterile processing articles, and his work is published across the globe. He is an industry disruptor on a mission to equip sterile processing professionals with the skills and knowledge to fight dirty every instrument, every time. What impact do disruptive products, technologies, and services have on our sterile processing teams? How do frontline users respond to the disruptive products entering our market? Today, Hank will flesh out these questions and help us discover a roadmap for understanding and preparing for continued disruption in our industry. Get ready to join Hank and discover the countless steps that must come together for sterile processing teams to successfully navigate a constant change in our industry. Let's welcome Hank Balch.
What's up, Sterile Processing Universe and OR Universe? Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today on the topic of industry disruption. Now, this can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but as an industry disruptor myself, I feel like I've got a unique perspective on it, not only from being a frontline technician, department leader, etc., but now also being on the other side of changing the way that our industry does many of the things that we've done the same way for years and years and years, and managing that change. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. As some of you may know, this theme came up out of a Beyond the Tour episode that Beyond Clean did. If you haven't checked out Beyond the Tour, you can check out that film series through our Beyond Clean YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com/Beyond Clean and check out. We got 2 episodes out currently, one with Anderson Sterilizers and the other one with One Tray IST. And this industry disruption theme came out of that episode with IST. And in particular, it brought up this idea of what does an industry do when something comes in and shakes it all up? How do department leaders respond? How should frontline technicians respond? Those are the themes that we're going to talk about in today's session. As always, if you have questions during this session, please submit them through the Q&A function. And if we don't get to all the questions during this session, I'd be happy to follow up directly with you after we're completed. So we know change is hard, even if you're adaptable. Sometimes it just takes a while to get used to change in our departments, but you're not going to last very long in sterile processing or in the operating room for that matter if you can't handle change, or at least find a way to get through that change and still keep your sanity. However, disruptive change and innovative change is a different kind of animal altogether. We're not necessarily just talking about, hey, today the new policy is you have to clock in only 5 minutes before instead of 7 minutes before. You know, those kind of changes, they hit us every single day that you walk into the department. What we're talking about is really that ground level, that foundation shaking kind of change that can really make you lose your bearings sometimes, because this may be something that literally, again, has never been done in our industry before. And we built this presentation to really equip you to confront that change head on, find out what's causing your stress levels, what's causing the stress levels of your team, and then not only to get through the change, but to get through it in a way where you can see the bigger picture of what's happening in your department. at the facility level and across the entire industry. Before we really jump into the remainder of these slides, I want to just pause real quick and thank you again for giving your valuable time to not only this session, but this entire conference. I know there's plenty of things that you could be doing today. There's probably people knocking on your door right now saying, hey, can you come out and help us with this? We had a question about that. But you're committing your time and attention to us. And I just want to take a moment and say from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. It means the world to us that you're willing to give us your time, and we want to make that time as valuable as we can for you. So as we get rolling here, I want to ask a question about how comfortable you are with change. Now, some of you may answer, I love it. I love change. It's what keeps me going. It's what gets me excited about my job. It's why I love healthcare. So your answer is bring it on, right? There's another part of y'all on the other end of the spectrum that are like, nope, change, not for me. I don't like it. It's confusing. It's frustrating. It's stressful, just like we mentioned earlier. As I said, you're going to be on this other end and says, no, don't want it. No, thank you. Goodbye. And then we have C, kind of a fun one. How comfortable are you with change? I have to wash my hands every time I touch it. So trying to be a little humorous there, but I'm talking about the change that's in your pocket, the quarters, nickel, dimes, pennies. And for those of y'all who have kids, there's something about change that they just want to put it in their mouth. I don't know why, but my boys just love putting quarters in their mouths. I'm like, guys, you have no idea how dirty that is. Anyways, so this question is really to get at the fact that there are going to be different responses in your department for your comfort level with change, even though, yes, we've all signed up in healthcare and we know change is just part of it. That doesn't mean that you're extremely comfortable with it. So, what is industry disruption? And I'm going to give the boring definition from the dictionary here, and then we're going to spend a lot of time in this session really drilling down on what does this mean for sterile processing and the operating room. So industry disruption is a process whereby a smaller company with fewer resources is able to successfully challenge established incumbent businesses. Wake up, wake up. If that definition put you to sleep, hang here with me. Okay, we're just getting started. Yeah. There's a couple of important keywords there. Number one, it's a process. Industry disruption, although it may feel like it, doesn't happen overnight. It involves resources, and it has to successfully challenge or change the status quo. So disruption and change are kind of the same thing. You're probably more familiar with this concept than you may give yourself credit for. For example, many of us drive cars, but at one time in history, obviously, no one had a car. Everything was done either on foot or on horseback, and if you're anywhere near an Amish community like I am actually up here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we have Amish that still to this day do not drive cars. They're driving everywhere they go. They're on horse and buggy, or they're on foot. And it's so interesting to see the contrast because they're driving on the side of the road, so all these cars are passing them, right? The high-tech, the innovative disruption, and then you've got folks that are still operating as if it was the late 1800s, right? Now, that transition, though, wasn't as simple as coming up with the idea for an engine, although that is how that automobile obviously got started. It took many different people trying and failing and a lot of resources, but eventually that change happened in a way that automobiles became the primary mode of transportation, at least for the majority of us, right? Now, I can't go on past this automotive topic here without giving you a quote that I absolutely love from Henry Ford, and I've shared this a couple of times on the podcast before, but it's a quote about innovation that Henry Ford mentions, and he says, "If I would have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." All right, so this is a guy who developed, obviously, the Ford Motor Company, the Model T Ford, really a spearhead innovator in his space, in the automotive space. And he said, if I would have asked my customers, they would have told me I wanted faster horses. Now, what he's getting at there is oftentimes for industry disruption, the users or the customers may not be aware or able to think as disruptively as someone can from the outside looking in with that fresh set of eyes. You've probably heard that idea before when we bring people in our departments to look at our process. They're looking as a fresh new set of eyes to not take anything for granted, not make any assumptions, just to see what's going on and then see if anything stands out to us that could be a challenge or a barrier or in need of change. So that's what these true industry disruptors like Henry Ford and others in our space are doing to the industry. They're asking those kind of secondary questions, not faster horses, but how can I really change this entire model and turn it on its head? Now, a lot of disruption can be ongoing, like streaming entertainment versus traditional cable services, right? How many of y'all today still have cable? Or if you do, are you actually using it as much as you're using the new streaming services? Probably not, but cable hasn't necessarily gone away. It's certainly been impacted by the disruption of streaming, but it's still there, and it's losing much of its market share. Now, in applying this to sterile processing, disruption impacts the current ways that we do our jobs or the current products and solutions that we may be using to do that job. Those of you who have been in the industry for decades, you've seen this. I don't have to tell you this, but we've got a lot of folks who have brand new to the operating room space, just got out of nursing school, just got out of surgical tech school, just got out of sterile processing training programs, and they're new. Like, this is the world that lasts like 1, 2, 3 years. This is the world they know. They haven't seen all of the transitions and all the shakeups and all the automation that many of y'all who have been around for decades have seen. For example, the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy. What the man? Okay, the first laparoscopic gallbladder removal. Let's just stay there, Hank. Today, with my vocabulary words, it's hard enough to just speak normal English. When I've got to say these technical terms, you're putting me out of my comfort zone. Anyways, the first laparoscopic gallbladder removal wasn't performed until 1985. For context, that's 1 year after I was born. All right, 1984 babies that represent here, okay? And that was just experimental. In just a few short years, how standard is that procedure? Even though this is a different procedure, a couple years ago I had my appendix out. And I remember the nurse, came in my room. She didn't know what I did or anything. And this is before the procedure. And she said, you don't have to worry. Now we take these out laparoscopically. Just a couple holes and you're done. And I appreciated, what she was trying to say. But again, in this context, that is a disruption to the way that procedure in the past was done. It improved the process. It involved resources, and again, it successfully changed the dynamic of how that procedure, how that process actually happens, right? So this is happening all the time, all over the place, all around us. Now, let's talk about industry disruption a little bit more as a concept. It's a process that a smaller company with fewer resources is able to successfully challenge that incumbent business. You can kind of think of it a lot in a way of David and Goliath, right? It's the small one that goes against the big one and somehow finds a way to win. It equals change. So, what does industry disruption look like from that manufacturer perspective? As I mentioned before, and I know that we're going to have different folks tuning into this session who are coming from these different perspectives. You may be there as a user in sterile processing. You may be a user in the operating room. You may be on the manufacturer side of things. You may even be on the regulatory side of things. We're going to take a look at a few of those different perspectives and walk through this conversation to give you some more insight on how to manage, again, what this change actually looks like and feels like for you and your team. So from the manufacturer perspective, there's an idea or innovation. And we tend to think about a good idea being all that it takes to make a big difference, right? But in reality, there's a lot that has to happen for an idea to actually come to life, to become a real-life product or service. And most of these ideas actually just remain an idea forever. They never go past that, oh, yeah, I thought about that. Like, how many times have you had a situation, which I'm sure many of you have, like you see this product come out and you're like, oh, man, me and my buddies were talking about that 5 years ago, that we were hanging out and we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool? I'll give you an example. Like, we thought we were geniuses in 2015 maybe, and I was working in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was snowing all the time, and we had to find ways to get dark driveways or our sidewalks, plowed. And so there's this sterile processing traveler who worked with us there. We were just chatting. We were like, wouldn't it be cool if we created this mobile app, kind of like Uber, because Uber was brand new back then, that instead of getting a car to take you someplace, you could request that someone comes and plows your driveway to get rid of the snow. And we did a lot of talking and thinking, like, oh yeah, that's so awesome. Everybody's going to want that. It's so easy, so convenient. Well, a couple weeks later, we started really doing some research and we looked it up on the App Store, and guess what? Yeah, there was a mobile app that was out there called Plows and Mows, and that's exactly what it was. You went on, you get a request to get your driveway plowed or to get your grass mowed, and there you go. So we had an idea, and it was a good idea, and evidently it was such a good idea that someone else had it and actually did something with it. So I just share that story and scenario to say it takes more than a good idea to disrupt an industry. To get started, first you got to research and develop all the specific features and functions of whatever that idea or innovation is, right? And this goes back again to that plows and mows thing, right? Like, they created a mobile app. You got to figure out how you're actually going to build that solution in a way that the customer actually understands what it is you're providing and wants it, and they see the impact that it could have on their department. Number 3 is this patent protection. So many of y'all don't know, but I did a little stint in law school. I actually got a third of the way through. Law school's traditionally about 3 years. I did the whole first year. I started my second year, and that's when I got my first opportunity for promotion into a sterile processing manager position. I had been a technician and a specialist the entire time through grad school, turned into law school. But anyways, I did a year of contract law. And in contract law, they hammer in all things intellectual property and patents. Now, we don't go deep. There's some specialist law classes you can take that just spend all your time on intellectual property and patent law. However, you learn very quickly that ideas are valuable. Even ideas are not implemented necessarily. If someone else can get that idea and do something with it, then you've given them a tremendous amount of value. But all these ideas and all these processes have to be protected, and that's where this patent protection comes in, to protect and preserve ideas and tell the government that, hey, this was Hank's idea and it wasn't Johnny's idea. All right, so all of this is involved anytime a manufacturer begins that disruption process. Then we have to take this idea that's now been patented, it's now been researched, and we got to move on to the validation and the regulatory stage if it's required. Right? So these are often trials and beta testing, because what makes sense in our ideas may not actually make sense in the field when you're applying it. And there's probably products and services out there that you're using in your department where you're thinking, who dreamed this thing up? You know, it might have worked in a laboratory, but it does not work in real life sterile processing. Many of the IFUs, honestly, that we have to use are great examples of that. You know, like some technician who's never set foot in an operating room or in a decontamination area wrote these guidelines for how to reprocess or take this device apart, and you're like, guys, this is not real life. So that's where a lot of this trial and beta testing comes in, is we really want to make sure that this idea can work and that it does work in a consistent basis. In addition to that, then they move into what's called market research. You've probably heard this term before in the industry. Some of y'all are even involved in market research projects, either through the Beyond Clean Advisory Group or through other market research groups that are out there that want the feedback from users like you in the field doing the work. They want to know, hey, if we had this idea, if we had this service, what would you think about it? How much would you be willing to spend for it? What are the blind spots that we're not aware of? All of that goes into that market research stage. Now comes the fun part, branding. If you know me and you know Beyond Clean, we love branding. The whole idea for Beyond Clean around our name is a great proof of concept for how branding works. We were thinking back in 2017 of creating this sterile processing podcast. And the question was, well, what are we going to name it? It's a great idea. We did some market research. Like, we know that we want to do this. But now the question is, what are we going to name it that really communicates who we are and what we stand for, what we're providing? So this name, Beyond Clean, was one of the ones that we put down on paper. And obviously it was the one that we ended up choosing. But so much goes in to that branding. It can really do wonders for connecting what that innovation is to your customers, either intellectually or even emotionally sometimes. So go to market. You've got it all regulated, got it all validated, you got the branding down, you know what it's going to be called, you did all your market research, but now is where the rubber meets the road. How do we get this device and innovation into the market? And it's a big push, right? It takes a lot of time and a lot of steps to get that idea created, manufactured, on contract many times into the hands of the users. And to do that, obviously, there's a level of education and user support it has to happen. The last thing that you want with a new disruptive product or innovation is to get it out there into the OR, get a couple of nurses using it. They don't understand, or they're not happy with that user interface, or they just haven't really been trained on all the ins and outs of it, and then they have a bad experience. So what do? They tell their friends, hey, we used that, or we trialed that last week. No good. Not good. It's very hard to use, doesn't do what it says, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it could just go back to where they did not receive that education and support that's necessary to really drive that disruptive innovation home. Key point here, and this is that little asterisk at the bottom, a business doesn't start making money until this go-to-market step. So that at number 8 there. All of the investment, all the time, all the effort, all the paychecks that they're paying to put this thing is huge and massive sometimes. So you're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on some of these larger projects go in to just getting us to market, just getting that in your hands as the clinical user. So they've got, yes, a lot of money, but they've got a lot of heart, especially these business owners, who have these ideas. This is their baby. Like, you've spent years of your life pouring into this idea that you really think could change an industry. Now you're bringing it to market. And it's kind of like that feeling that if you've had children, again, like you have a little baby, if you were to hand your baby to someone to hold them and they're like, oh, this is an ugly baby, you would never want anyone to say that. Although now that I have kids, I do understand there is such a thing as ugly babies out there. Thankfully, I don't have any ugly babies, but, we've all seen some of those ugly babies. But either way, you wouldn't tell anyone that their baby is ugly. And it's the same thing with this. Even if you don't like the product or innovation, I want to encourage everyone out here today. Don't forget that these are not just nameless, faceless products out there that are not connected to anyone's heart or anyone's history. Like, these things really do become very, very personal. So if you don't like it, great. You don't got to buy it. But don't go out of your way, to knock on something that someone has spent a lot of time and effort and risk in, because these are the ways that our industry actually goes forward. So I just want to say that. Okay, so we're talking about the manufacturer perspective. That's what it kind of looks like, coming from that idea creator space, right? So you're bringing this idea all the way to the product and service in the market. Now, what's the perspective from the other side, from sterile processing or from the operating room, in terms of disruption? Well, first, obviously, you have to become aware of a problem or a product or service that solves a problem that you already have. So this is why continuing education and networking is so important for growth in sterile processing and the operating room space. It's often said that you don't know what you don't know, and how are you going to know something unless you've been introduced to the problem or to the possible solution? You've got to be connected with other folks in the industry that are doing the same thing you're doing, that have different experiences that you have sometimes, that can draw your attention and increase your awareness to see those things that are right in front of you. So a great example of this is tracking systems. Many of us have tracking systems. There's a lot of y'all out there today, God bless you, that are still doing things manually. I know that is super difficult, right? So that's why I say, props to you if you're getting it done. But many of us have a tracking system. You're familiar with what tracking systems do. But if you haven't used multiple tracking systems over your career, you've been at one facility and you're very used to that one tracking system, you can kind of become comfortable with the challenges inherent to your tracking system or the challenges inherent to your database. What I mean by that is, if you get a new traveler in, or if you get a new hire who comes in from another facility who has used a different tracking system, who had a different instrument database, and perhaps it was a much cleaner database, easier to use, or a different system that was way easier to use, they may come in and be like, guys, man, y'all are missing out. It takes you 35 minutes to assemble this tray, and it should only take you 15 minutes if all the data was clean. And if you didn't have to click a million different places to look items up, there's solutions out there that are so much better, so much faster. Those are the things that you may not know if you're not connected and aware in this larger industry context that we're talking about. So that's number one. This perspective industry disruptions, just be aware that there are new products and services coming out all the times that, yes, they may be new. And yes, depending on your comfort level with change, you may be more or less comfortable to invite that new change into your world, but they're happening. So just don't take that status quo for granted is what I'm saying on this point. So number 2, you need to know what's going on in the market. So we just kind of talked a little bit about that for that networking piece, but you should try to be aware of what products are being developed out there. And then research and evaluate those products to determine if they're the right solution and they meet the right pain points that you're experiencing in your facility, but not only in your department, but cross-functionally through this whole continuum of safe surgical care. Right? So one of the things I love about these conferences that we do is we always have different folks tuning in from different perspectives. We've got the sterile processing folks, we've got the infection prevention folks, we've got the operating room folks, we've got the vendor manufacturers, like we've got biomedical tuning in. All of these folks have a part to play in that research and evaluation stage when it comes to these disruptive technologies or products. However, to really give the best insight out of that research, you really need a broad understanding for what's going on in your workflow. If it's a sterile processing workflow, if it's an operating room workflow, you don't want to be looking at a potential solution if you don't really understand how that solution fits in to what your very unique and very precise workflow is. Right? You don't want to solve a problem in manual cleaning, or think you're going to solve the problem if you don't really understand the stages of manual cleaning that these frontline technicians have to go through on a daily basis. So let's say that you do have that broad understanding. Then we have to decide which product or process do we adopt. Which one of these industry disruptive innovations is the best fit? Now keep in mind, very frequently the person who has the final decision may not be that aware of all these things we talked about related to sterile processing in the operating room. They may not have that broader understanding of the workflow and the expectation for quality. So these could be people like your supply chain vice president or your chief operating officer. They may not know a lot about your workflow, but this is where your department leadership comes in to fill in the gap, to make that case clearly but creatively, and convince them that this particular solution, yes, it may be new, but it's necessary to meet the pain points that we're struggling with in our department. So, yeah, this kind of requires these department leaders to become an internal sales person, right? So even though they're not going to be making a profit on the innovation or the service that they're bringing in to help your teams, but they're going to benefit and you're going to benefit, but it still requires someone to be convinced. So you kind of got to, from the inside, take it upon yourself, if you're bought into that innovation, and say, okay, how am I going to sell this? How am I going to communicate to these upline leaders who are not aware that this change is necessary? Now, once we make the decision, it's going to require a lot of change, right? So we're going to need training, we're going to need competency. All that's got to be tied in to whether or not this product and innovation is adopted properly. And honestly, this is one of the most challenging areas for department leaders. Trying to enact change successfully for our frontline users. Typically speaking, the more dramatic the change, the more dramatic the pushback will become. Can I say dramatic? I don't mean like drama, but I just mean the bigger the change, the bigger the pushback. I don't have to tell any of you that, but if you walk into your apartment and something big has changed, like a big new piece of equipment or a big workflow or like a big service has changed, This really puts the sterile processing leader and operating room leader back in that sales role again. Because not only do they need to convince their upline leaders to make the investment, they also need to convince and engage their frontline users in the decision-making process. So just a little takeaway note here. Don't make any big decisions without engaging your staff. Right? 101, common sense. Do not disrupt the status quo in your department without engaging these frontline users, because we're going to be the ones using them. We're going to be the ones with the new process. We have to live with this disruptive innovation or technology. So we should be able to give feedback about the process and about the ideas prior to this change just being kind of dropped on us from the sky and expected to figure it out. So in order to make that sale from the leadership perspective down to your frontline staff, you've got to find a way to be persuasive, but also to cultivate a culture and understanding of being open to new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things for your staff. Now, I know this is going to be one of the most difficult things about this entire presentation. You're like, Hank, I have to teach people how to be open to change. Yes, and I know what I'm asking. I know how difficult that is. Now, one thing that you should consider, though, when you're trying to influence a shift in behavior or thinking, especially when it comes to disruption, is to ask for less. As humans, we develop a certain set of internal markers for what seems possible. If you're asking for a change that's way too far outside of that window, it's automatically going to get ignored and pushed back. We're going to say, no, not going to do it. We could never do that. Try breaking down your request for change into smaller, bite-sized pieces that will eventually lead to that big shift or change in behavior. So let me give you a great example of that. Let's just say that we're going to convert all of our cleaning brushes eventually, right? That's the big change. It's probably not a good idea to say, okay, guys, tomorrow when you come in, all your brushes are going to be different. All the sizes are going to be different. They're going to be labeled differently. They're going to be stored differently, like we were having them in bins. Now they're going to be hanging up on the wall. Good luck and have fun figuring it out. That's not the way to initiate this kind of disruptive change in your workflow. Instead, carve that out into little pieces and say, hey guys, starting next week, we're going to start using a different cannula brush for these devices, and we're going to be hanging it on the wall. One brush, this is what you were using, this is what we're going to start using. Everyone already gave their feedback on that, so we're going to roll that out next week. Okay, that's doable. That's doable. One brush is doable. Let's make it happen. And then slowly over time, continue to roll out that change in that window of acceptable change for your people. Okay. Number 4 is decision and adoption. So we talked about this already on the last slide. Who's familiar with the product? How do we make those decisions? How do we adopt? Then I went over really quickly number 5, training and competency. But this is so huge and massive, because if you miss this piece here, just like we talked with the nursing example, you're going to potentially lose the opportunity to improve the process, not because it wasn't a good solution, but because your frontline technicians were not thoroughly competent or confident in the training that they received about the new workflow or the device. So do not compromise on this step. Anything new coming to your department, if it's a new laser, if it's a new container, if it's a new repair partner, thorough training has to be involved in this intake process to make absolutely sure that there are no questions when it's time for go live, in order for you to have the best chance of this change being successful and not unduly rejected because there's a lack of competence and training. We already talked about the experience with a new product and that dramatic shift. And then policies and procedures. So the consultant in me kind of nerds out about these policies and procedures. I know at the management level, it's very, very hard to keep your policies and procedures updated with the pace of change. So if you're a technician, I really want to challenge you. I know there's bad leaders out there. There's bad managers. You can get frustrated at them for a lot of reasons, that they probably they probably deserve. But there's a lot of great leaders out there too that are just so overwhelmed with all the expectations that they have placed on them for everything else. And policies and procedures are one of these things that can easily fall to the bottom of the list, and yet they're so critically important for Joint Commission compliance and for accreditation compliance, because if you make changes to your products or processes and you're not updating your policies and procedures, then you have an inconsistency there, and they are going to find that 99% out of 100 times. They're going to identify, yeah, so it still says you're using 24-hour biologicals, and this is your policy that technically you're supposed to be following, but right now it looks like you've got 24-minute biologicals. You know, what's going on for that? And that's going to be a problem. So make sure on any of these disruptive changes that you put a checklist in there to confirm not only like a new policy, but to look at all your old policies that may reference the old way that you had done things and get those updated. Number 8, and this is not in chronological order, right? Because I already brought up this feedback piece. You don't ask for feedback at the end of everything, after the decisions are made, and say, hey guys, we're going to do this. Any questions? That's a good recipe for a rebellion on your hands. You really want to engage feedback through the entire disruptive process for anything new technology-wise or product-wise, so that you can get buy-in, but honestly, so you can learn more about the process from those frontline users and make a better informed decision. All right, so regulatory and accreditation here. It's very similar, the first couple of stages that we talked about through the user. These guys and gals that are out there doing accreditation surveys, so by this I mean like your State Department of Health, the Joint Commission, the DNV. If you're in the ambulatory setting, there's other like ambulatory accreditation groups out there. They are often not aware of all the new products and all the new services that are hitting the market every week, every month, every year, because they are constantly, like, folks are out there with great ideas. They're going to market. And it's not like Joint Commission surveyors like get a news brief every day. It's like, oh, hey, there's a new tracking system out there, and it does different things in sterile processing. Or, hey, there's a new patient positioning system for the operating room. I need to check that out. So oftentimes there is a gap in awareness on the part of these entire agencies, but then specifically these surveyors out there where they have never even seen this product before, didn't even know it existed, not quite sure what it does. So that awareness piece has to be filled in oftentimes by the user, by you, because the first time they're going to see it is in your department, on your survey, and they're like, hey, I see that you're doing something different at the sink, but I've never seen that dosing system. Can you explain what that is and why you use it? And, you know, you should assume the best. You know, don't assume that they're trying to catch you in that question. They're likely just trying to learn about it, because if you see it one place, it's likely that you're going to start seeing it pop up in other places. So they're trying to do their due diligence in becoming aware and researching and evaluating how these disruptive devices are impacting the spaces that they're surveying in. Now, when you teach them these things, or when they see these things, and sometimes, they're not like living in a box or in a basement somewhere. Like they do read magazines, they are listening to podcasts, they're probably even tuning in to these sessions today. They do learn things, and when they learn things, they take those back to the home offices, right, for Joint Commission, and then they start spreading out that information and insight and say, hey guys, there is this new product on the market that we've seen in the operating room. This is what it does, just in case anyone has any questions about it. And if you've seen it elsewhere, you've seen a good policy or procedure around it, let us know so we can share that with the future hospitals and survey sites that we're surveying. So outside of just that accreditation piece are these work groups. You've probably heard the term work group out of the AMI committees. Now, these are groups that come together that are specialized and focused around solving a particular problem or process. And I say solving, but it's really coming together and discussing recommendations that can be shared in a way that would give users more of a guideline for how to approach the question or how to think about the question. And then they leave it up to the users, obviously, to make the final determination for how we're going to use this device or this innovation in our facility. So AMI makes very frequent and regular uses of these specialized work groups. In fact, all of their technical information reports, or TIR reports, and all their standards groups, so like ST79, that's a standard group, they all started with work groups. And any continuing work on those reports and standards begin in the context of one of these work groups. And they often read through white papers and case studies to really become familiar with what is going on in the space of biological indicators, for instance, because there's a lot of innovation going on in that space right now. So that's kind of where they start. Obviously, out of those work groups and all the work that's done, we do get publication of standards and recommendations that are trying to keep up with the speed of innovation. And this is a real challenge for these groups such as AMI, such as AORN, anybody that's out there kind of publishing guidelines and recommendations. It's almost impossible to keep up with the speed of innovation because all these technologies, they're so secretive, right? Because you don't want folks to know that you're working on this new product. They keep it secret as long as they can until they're ready to go to the market. And then boom, it hits the market. And now you've got these standards and these work groups like, oh my goodness, there's something that's being sold and is being used, and we don't have any standards for it. And you hear this a lot, like you'll hear users, or maybe you've even said it yourself before. It's like, well, this is not in the AMI guidelines anywhere. There's no reference of this. Now, depending on what it is that you're referring to, that could mean one thing or the other, but just because it's not in a standard or just because there's not a standard about it, it doesn't really impact the fact that this device, if it's an FDA-approved device, it's been through FDA clearance, it's been validated, it is safe to use, right? So if it's being sold in the U.S. and it's a medical device, it's safe to use because it's been through FDA clearance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to sell it or to buy it. But just because it's being bought and sold in your department doesn't mean that all these industry guidelines have had time to get caught up, to learn about it, and to come together and create a consensus around how do we respond to this? Like, how do we tell folks or encourage folks to recommend folks to build policies and procedures in this context? And what's unique about this challenge around the speed of innovation is if it's just one product, there's not a lot of reason for the whole committee, the whole work group, to write a whole new standard or paragraph just to tackle one product. So you kind of need a tipping point. You need enough products or services, or you need enough customers and hospitals out there that are using this one disruptive product or service to really incentivize these groups to get together and say, okay, we need to give some guidance because there's just so much confusion and questions out there. So that's why you see that disconnect sometimes with, I got a product and I got a service that's already being sold, but there's no reference at all in any industry guidelines. It's not because there's not approval or because it doesn't work. It's just because that it takes time for these standards to get caught up. The final piece here that I'll just mention is collaborative conversation with users and industry. So this regulatory and accreditation piece, if it's AAMI work group, if it's your surveyors, if it's the FDA, there is a big need for us to talk more with each other. Like, you'll hear from folks that are on the AAMI committees all the time that they need more user representation, because by a large margin, the folks that are involved in those AAMI groups are consultants, which I don't have anything against consultants. I'm a consultant, but they're consultants or they're manufacturers. And what you don't have a lot is the folks that are actually using these guidelines and procedures in their facility, having to live them out, needing to put the ST79 document to work in their facility. You don't have a lot of users, and definitely not at the technician level. So even the folks that are on the committees are often managers and directors. Nothing against managers and directors, guys. I was one of those too. But the people doing the work in decontam, having to live and die by ST79, they're not on these committees. They're not in these work groups, and they're not helping to draft these recommendations. So I would just add to the encouragement that you hear out there that we need more users involved, not only in AAMI. There's a lot of things that you can be involved with to impact this disruption. In fact, you can be involved in the Beyond Clean advisory group that's giving feedback to these manufacturers about the new products and services that you're coming out with. There's tons of ways to do that, but I highly encourage you to make a concerted effort to make your voice heard sooner rather than later in this timeline for industry disruption. All right, so we've got a couple minutes here, and I'm going to wrap it up in a bow and make sure that you walk away and with a clear answer to what just happened to me. What? I just got hit by the industry disruption bus. Now, what did I learn from it? So here's the important thing. It's easy to overlook the fact that this collaborative conversation implies that there's already users using a new product or service that has not been written into the standards yet, and that's what I mentioned. This means that our standards and our guidelines are typically reactive. They're trying to catch up. They're trying to react to something that's already made it to the market. It's unusual, though not impossible, for standards to actually lead the way for change. So when we hear like, there's a new update that's coming to ST79. Well, that's great, and it's going to be good for the industry. I like updates, but so everyone is aware, like, that update is probably like 5 years behind the time. Like, they're talking about things that have been in the industry, in the market, going on probably for 5 years or more. That's how old these updates are to the standards. That's how far behind the speed of innovation is, and that's why it's so important for you to really understand how this timeline of innovation works in your facility. And yeah, that last point is, just a restatement. Typically, these standards are adjusted after the disruption has occurred, so no surprise there. Now, everything in this, though, forms a feedback loop when it comes together. And this is the only way the disruption and change happens effectively. Manufacturers have to work with sterile processing users who have to work with regulatory bodies, and round and round and round the process goes. We have to communicate with each other and hopefully do so in a proactive way so that the manufacturer doesn't come out with something that just can't be used. At the sterile processing user doesn't have a product that's dropped in their lap, but they don't understand how this fits into the regulatory guidelines that are out there today. All of this loop has to be taken in toto in order for our teams and our industry to effectively move forward. Okay, a couple more slides here and then we'll be done. The resources that are involved in industry disruption are unique. And this goes back to the David and Goliath comparison here, right? So in these established companies, you have technical and scientific departments and teams. You've got an education team. You got a marketing team. You got a regulatory team to do all these things. You got a major source of market shares. So just think the big names out there that you know are big players in the space. They've got all that. When you got a disruptive company or technology in play, they don't have any of that. They likely have very little technical and scientific support. It's got to be completed and published to get that train going. Have to create the new education. They got to distribute new marketing. They've got to work on the regulatory side of things. Obviously, it has to be approved through the FDA if it's a medical device, but then they have to get that process started if they're going to try to impact the industry standards and guidelines out there. And they got to create their own market share. All of that stuff has to be built in order for that disruptive technology to even get to you successfully. So, because of this, it often creates that kind of disconnect and friction that you'll see many times for sterile processing users or operating room users when they're like, yeah, I like all the things that an established company has because they've already got all their education figured out. They already have all their marketing. There's 20 different people I can call about technical questions. That's what I like because that's comfortable. Well, again, nothing against the comfortable big players in the space. I like and I love a lot of those companies. A lot of those products are great. But if you're keeping that from being on that disruptive spectrum of innovation and improving the industry, just be aware of how this plays out. This means that early product and technology information may be limited from these disruptors. There may be misunderstandings and misconceptions from folks that just don't really see what's going on with this technology. There's probably a lack of social media and web presence. You may not see them or have seen them at trade shows or in seminars. There's not a lot of word of mouth because they don't have a lot of customers yet. And they may not have a lot of reference or probably any reference in the industry guidelines, as I said, because they're like 5-10 years behind the times. So don't be surprised if you've got these innovators coming to your door saying, hey, we got this new product, it's awesome, trust us. And you're like, well, yeah, like let me see all your other customers. Or why haven't I seen you at a trade show? Well, the reason is because we're new. That's why. It's pretty simple. So to kind of drill this down, into a couple of bullet points, there will be limited product and technology information, but that does not mean that no information exists. In order for these devices to even get to you, again, it's got to be research and developed. They've got to be approved through the regulatory agencies, FDA or otherwise. Information is there. It may not be cleaned up and pretty the way that you're used to seeing it with some of the big players. Just because there's misunderstandings and misconceptions does not mean that the science is not clear. Keep in mind, this is a competitive space out there. You've got a lot of folks that have vested interests in selling products and services. And so if they have part of the market share and they see a disruptor coming in, you shouldn't be surprised when there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions that get thrown into the into the dust, create dust in the air. But that doesn't mean the science is not clear. So always be willing to ask that partner who's trying to disrupt the industry, can I see your science? They have it, or they wouldn't be talking to you with a product, and it is likely clearer than any misconceptions or misunderstandings that you may be hearing out there. Just because these new companies don't have a major social media presence doesn't mean the company is not reputable. Now, that being said, I would not be Beyond Clean if I would not encourage these disruptive companies to get active on social, especially through Facebook and LinkedIn, and obviously to do stuff like the kinds of things that we do at Beyond Clean to introduce this broader audience to who you are and what you're doing in the space. Again, just because you're not at a trade show or a seminar does not mean the product isn't on the market. It just means that you don't have the investment to spend for those live shows. Just because there's limited word of mouth does not mean that no other hospitals are using it. And just because it's not in an industry guideline does not mean that it's not in line with best practice. So let me wrap and just say, all of this industry disruption comes down to you. As a sterile processing leader or technician, as the operating room leader or nurse, you have the ability to lead the entire industry and invite disruptors and innovators to improve your processes. Or you could actually be the disruptor yourself. Many of you have fantastic ideas to improve the space, to improve the workflow, to make it safer, to make it more efficient. You have these ideas today, and I hope through this presentation, some of you have been challenged to take that idea and do something with it, to bring your own innovations and improvements to change the way that we fight dirty across the country and around the globe. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. If you've got any questions that we did not get to today through the Q&A, please reach out to me at hank@beyondclean.net, and I will turn it back over to the host.
All right. Thanks, Hank. A lot of really good insight in that presentation, so we really appreciate you once again. And as always, love the take on it takes more than a good idea to make something happen and grow for this industry. So appreciate that. We have hit the hour mark, and so we don't have any time for any Q&A. But if you, again, as Hank mentioned, if you have anything that comes up after watching this presentation, feel free to reach out to him via email, or he's always on LinkedIn, as you know. So feel free to touch base with him there. Once again, thanks to Hank. And if you would like to reach out to him, again, there's the speaker bio on the lower right hand of your screen. And there's going to be a short 15-minute break before the next session. And thank you for joining us. Reminder that the next session is going to be a really engaging panel discussion. So that's going to be fun. Hank's going to be joining us once again. And we've got a great panel of industry pros to, converse back and forth. So looking forward to that one. We'll see you guys in just under 15 minutes. Thanks.